One bad match can change everything. A wrestler can have a career known for exciting and acclaimed matches, that is, until they have that one match that almost changes their entire reputation with fans. Over the years, some wrestling icons have had that one match in their career that fans wish to forget, and the match was so bad that it could have ruined their established legacy and stature. So with that being said, let's take a look at 10 horrible WWE matches that almost ruined a legacy. Number 10. Team WWE vs. Team Nexus. Before we begin to discuss Team WWE vs. Team Nexus from the SummerSlam in 2010, it's important to point out that the quality of the match wasn't horrendous. It was just that the politics involved in the match finish and the booking of the final stages of the match almost completely shattered the fans' perception of John Cena. The initial plans for the match finish were to see Team Nexus go over. This would have given WWE a lot of storyline options, and it would have made the stable look legitimate, and could have potentially created some major players for WWE's future. Cena, however, got this finish changed to make himself stand tall. This was a baffling decision, and it made Cena look insanely selfish. Cena knew he made the wrong decision, and he had to work extremely hard over the next few years to rebuild his integrity, and show that he did actually care about the future of the company. Number 9. Pat Patterson vs. Gerald Briscoe. Pat Patterson and Gerald Briscoe are considered wrestling royalty, and during their decorated careers, they earned the respect and admiration of both their fans and peers. However, in 2000, the two legends competed in a match against each other that almost ruined their entire legacy. The two wrestled in a hardcore evening gown match at the 2000 King of the Ring pay-per-view. The match involved the two wrestling around in women's clothing to utter silence from the live crowd. The match was filled with horrendous botches, mistimed spots, and you could see Patterson and Briscoe's legacy disintegrating live on pay-per-view. Although the match was a train wreck, thankfully, it's not often cited when discussing their careers, as fans and wrestling historians like to forget that the match ever took place. Number 8. Jerry Lawler vs. Michael Cole. When Jerry the King Lawler found out that he would finally be having a match at WrestleMania in 2011, little did he know that the match would go on to be considered as one of the worst matches in WWE history. Lawler would face Michael Cole in a match that fans had very little interest in seeing. The match was terrible, and this was mainly down to Cole not being an actual wrestler, meaning the semi-retired Lawler had to work insanely hard. The match went on and was actually one of the longest matches on the entire card. The match could have ruined Lawler's reputation with fans, but fans were quick to recognize that the match quality and how the match was laid out had nothing to do with the WWE Hall of Famer, and any blame directed his way would be misplaced. Number 7. Booker T vs. Buff Bagwell. In 2001, WWE acquired WCW, and early plans from Vince McMahon were to make WCW its own unique entity. The pilot for this one would take place in July of 2001, as the main event portion of Raw for 1 week only would be turned into a WCW-centered show. The main event was to see Booker T take on Buff Bagwell. Booker and Buff were incredibly talented performers, but the match stunk. It was truly unpleasant viewing, and the fans wanted no part of it. The match was so poorly received that WWE scrapped any plans to make WCW its own entity, and they proceeded with the WWE vs. Alliance storyline. For Buff, it shattered his reputation within the wrestling industry, and he would be released shortly after. For Booker, he had a lot of work to do, and to his credit, he put the work in, and over the next few years, he became one of the most decorated and celebrated performers in WWE history. Booker would discuss the impact of the match during an appearance on the Not Sam Wrestling podcast. The former world champion would state, "I knew that was a bad night when it was over. I knew it wasn't our greatest moment. We got pulled into the office immediately and were told it wasn't our best night. I said, put me in the ring with anybody, that smell will go away real quick. The next person I think I worked with was Diamond Dallas Page. Me and Dallas, we went at it, but it wasn't the greatest match in the world. But Dallas is a hard worker. We went out and had an okay match. For me, I had no thoughts that I would be there this long. That was not the plan, but I knew I was going to be a guy that was going to have a run in WWE, and it was going to be a pretty good run." Number 6. Triple H vs. Scott Steiner. On paper, Triple H vs. Scott Steiner doesn't sound like the worst match in the world. However, when the two squared off for the world title at the Royal Rumble in 2003, nobody could have expected how downright awful the match would be. The match was all over the place, and they had no chemistry whatsoever. Going into the match, Steiner was the beloved babyface, but by the end of the match, his performance was so terrible that fans had completely turned on him. Some of this could be put down to Steiner's drop foot syndrome, but it was still the match that almost ruined his entire reputation. Thankfully, Steiner eventually joined TNA, where he enjoyed moderate success in the popular Main Event Mafia stable, and he was eventually inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2022, making his match at the 2003 Royal Rumble a distant memory. Number 5. The Undertaker vs. Goldberg. There are a number of ways to describe The Undertaker's illustrious match with Goldberg at the 2019 Super Showdown pay-per-view, and all of them are negative. Going into the match, nobody expected a 5-star classic, as both men were way past their prime. However, they didn't expect a botch fest to ensue. The match was off to a terrible start after Goldberg suffered a concussion due to his age and limitations. The match should have been instantly stopped, but the two legends continued on. Basic moves were botched, and at one point Goldberg dropped The Undertaker on his head whilst performing the jackhammer. The Undertaker was quite rightly ashamed of the match, and it took a while for fans to accept that this was just a bad night for both former world champions. Number 4. Brock Lesnar vs. Goldberg. For the longest time, it appeared as if the match between Brock Lesnar and Goldberg at WrestleMania 20 was going to be their final match in WWE. Both were exiting the company, and both put on a lackluster performance, mainly down to them being taken aback by the negative fan reaction. Fans were disappointed that both men were leaving the company, and therefore wanted to hijack the match in any way they could. This match wasn't at the level traditionally expected for a Lesnar match on pay-per-view, and this would end up being his last match in WWE for 8 years. In relation to Goldberg, this would be his final match in WWE until 2016, and interestingly, when he returned to the company, he returned to face Lesnar once again in 2 matches that fully redeemed the poor WrestleMania 20 outing. Number 3. The Undertaker vs. Roman Reigns. WrestleMania 33 in 2017 was supposed to see The Undertaker finally hang up his wrestling boots. The Undertaker would face Roman Reigns in the main event of the show to put an end to his legendary career. The issue was that the match wasn't of the quality that the dead man or the fans wanted. There were a ton of botches, and The Undertaker really struggled to keep up with Reigns during the match. The Undertaker felt he let everyone down, and he knew that if he retired after this match, it could seriously impact his legacy. The Undertaker would wrestle a number of other matches over the next few years before capping off his career with an acclaimed match against AJ Styles at WrestleMania 36. Number 2. The Fiend vs. Seth Rollins. Following WrestleMania 35, Seth Rollins had ascended to become one of the top babyfaces in the entire WWE. However, when Rollins entered into a feud with the Fiend Bray Wyatt, this all changed. The two would collide at the Hell in a Cell pay-per-view, and the match was so poorly executed that fans often cite it as being the worst Hell in a Cell match in WWE history. The match was a true disaster, as WWE didn't want Rollins to lose the title, but they weren't quite ready to have The Fiend lose. This resulted in the match ending via referee stoppage. The match that was designed to end feuds and allow absolutely nothing to be off-limits was stopped, as Rollins' actions were deemed too violent. The backlash was so severe from fans that they began to chant "refund" and various profane words that can't be repeated. The majority of the backlash fell on Rollins, as fans by default blamed him for the match falling apart. Rollins went from a beloved babyface character to the most hated guy in the company virtually overnight. This match could have caused a lot of problems for Rollins' career moving forward, but thankfully Rollins pushed through, and thanks to some changes in Rollins' presentation, he once again became insanely popular with fans in the years that followed. Number 1. DX vs. the Brothers of Destruction. In 2018, Shawn Michaels made the drastic decision to come out of retirement for one final match. HBK would team up with Triple H to take on the Brothers of Destruction at the Crown Jewel pay-per-view. This decision was met with a ton of skepticism from fans, as HBK had the perfect send-off in 2010, and it seemed like a questionable decision to come out of retirement for the match. The match itself was even worse than fans expected. Nothing in the match seemed to work, and HBK looked like a shell of his former self. He was now bald, and it was clear that he wasn't in appropriate shape to be in a featured match. The match was so bad that HBK publicly declared that he regretted coming out of retirement. Due to this admission from HBK, fans have tried to erase the match from their minds and prefer to imagine a reality where HBK never came out of retirement.